Okay, I had a brief spell of 3.5 months working as a customer service advisor for a car finance company, and although I can't claim, obviously, with only a reasonably short period of time in there, to be any huge expert on the matter, I can still give you a bit of insight into what I consider the turned out it was 9 major points to be aware of before you go into getting a car on finance. For this example, I'm going to assume it's a new car, and it's part of the deal whereby you take it for 3 years until it starts to need its MOT, then you trade it in, and then you get a new one. You keep kind of going in that cycle unless you choose to pay the balloon payment. I'm going to make the assumption you probably don't, but you may well want to. Anyway, without any further ado, let's start the countdown. So, number 1. Be sure you want to buy that car before you purchase it. Sounds very, very obvious, but understand this. There isn't ever a get-out clause once you've got it. Because what will happen to that car once you buy it, it will never decrease in value more than when you drive it away for the first time. Why? Because there's a difference between brand new and then second hand or a return car, and the second you drive it away, the loan company that's issued with it, they then lost money if you return it because they can't sell it as a new car again. So you just suddenly go like, ooh, you know what, I would have preferred it in red. Not going to happen anymore. You will pretty much stuck with it. There is one way out of it, which is if there's a fault with it, or a fault happens within the first 30 days, you're entitled to return it then. This is UK law, by the way. I should make that very obvious in the title. You've got a 30-day return if there's a fault found with it. But otherwise, no, you're stuck with it. So it could be a very, very, very good thing to buy it on finance because it's manageable. You don't have to pay the upfront fee, and then it's taken away at the end. And you can just keep going with a new car, effectively renting. It's not a bad deal, but you need to be sure of a few things, and one of them definitely is, yes, be sure you want that car, it agrees with you, you like it in the test run, you're prepared to stick with it, because you're not getting out of it easily, or not without having to pay a significant financial hit. Number 2, don't think either the company issuing your finance, which is probably the same as the car dealership, although they'll have to be like a subsidiary firm like we were, or the dealer that you're buying off, don't think either of those two are your friend, okay? They might be doing their best to try and help you, but they're still business people at the end of the day. And as a rule of thumb, don't make that assumption. Be straight onto the small print, be very, very clear about what you're doing, and if you've got some way to record what goes on, all for the better, to be honest, because I've seen too many that's their word against the dealership, and they're saying, oh, they didn't tell me that, they didn't tell me that, they didn't tell me that. Really, I should be renaming this as just read the contract and read it thoroughly, because it's going to come down to your own name, what you sign for there. So be aware what's going on. Similarly, if you suddenly find that you don't have enough money to pay for the car, don't expect waves of sympathy either. It's a sad truth, but they're a loan company and they want their money back. So you do be able to keep on driving the car without being able to make those payments is very unlikely. They do allow certain payment breaks and things like that if you happen to lose your job, not leave your job, but lose your job. But blimey, yeah, be prepared to make this commitment and try and make sure you're in some kind of stable employment or at least you have a backup plan for how you're going to start to make the payments if they don't, because it ends up costing you more money that way, and if you don't pay it, then that's your credit score effective, and it'll be very difficult for you to be able to do such things again in the future. And also, if you want any mortgages and things like that, it can go very bad for you. Number 3, if you're afraid that you deal with your car, I suggest, even if you aren't deciding to then get a new car, like sort of out and continue the rotation, if you decide to return the car, I'd say return it early. Not super early, but I'm talking a couple of days early. Why? Because if you return it before the 3-year mark, the car is not due to have its MOT yet. If you certainly where I was, I think you had a 60-day grace period. So after the 3 years was up, you could return the car a couple of days after, or well, up to 60 days after if you wanted to, along with returning it 60 days early. Return it after the 3-year mark, you then are obligated to take it for its MOT. That obviously is going to cost you money to some extent, and it's better to return it a couple of days early, I'd say, and then have the car dealership have to pay for it. That's what I'd do in your situation anyway. 4. Be sure to be aware when the balloon payment is due to come out on your car. Now normally this is a week after your final payment, but not always. Sometimes they can go out together, or sometimes you've made one payment sort of up front, and then what you think is going to be the week the final payment due, the actual 7,000 or whatever it is, comes out a week earlier, and you're just not prepared for it, and your account goes overdrawn. And again, that's got the ramifications of having negative impact on your finance record, and then you'll get the sort of late payment fee as well. Again, don't assume these people are your friend. They might waive some of it. Generally speaking, although I didn't particularly like the way my company did business, they were a bit more lenient with the balloon payment coming out, because they're like, okay, fine, it is a lot of money and it's a one-off and it's the final thing, rather than the sort of day-to-day payments when you just happen to be a bit short in their account, and yeah, they don't really ever write those off, from my experience, the late payment fees. But be sure of that. Again, you've got to be an adult here and be aware that it's not something to think about lightly. You are signing into something, and it is a financial obligation. Make sure you know the date where that comes out. It will be in your original papers. Get it on your calendar and make sure of it. Don't just assume, and don't do it because the dealership told you that way. Personally, the dealers didn't really ever seem to, in my opinion, properly understand the nature of the finance that they were signing people up for, and they'd often be calling in asking us questions which actually, as dealers, they should have been knowing as part of their business. So yeah, be aware of that one. Number 5, keep everything you've got that comes with a car that you don't need to have on you, such as the first set of keys. Keep it in one safe place and mark it up and leave it there. So that's things like the vehicle handbook, spare keys, owner's manual, just all of the documents that they put together. Keep it in one place only, know where it is, don't touch it until you return it back. Why? Because if you've got any of those things missing, certainly the company I work for, and I think they're all quite similar to be honest, they will charge you so much money for like missing document, 80 quid, 120 quid. It's ridiculous what they charge. It's an absolute scandal, but it'll be somewhere in the terms and conditions, and you just have to accept it. Again, if you keep it all together, it's not an issue. If you lose it, you're going to have to pay a fine, and there isn't really any way out of that. 6. Make sure someone is there when you do get your car picked up. So I suppose it follows on early from the one that, as I say, do it a couple of days before it gets 3 years old, because, well, even 1 day's fine. Just make sure they're able to drive it off away without with it still being valid within its MOT, otherwise they won't be able to do it. But make sure someone's there for the pickup, because once again, and it's a growing theme that you'll keep hearing, if they're not, then you'll have to pay for them to revisit. There might even just be an outright penalty in place for having missed the pickup, and like a missed call out. So yeah, it's, when we did it, it was complimentary, your first one, if it was being handed back within the normal terms and conditions of the contract. You weren't handing it back early or anything. If that was the case, it was free. But missed that one, next time you're paying, and it's, another 150 quid, whatever it is. So that's another one to get right. Check with whatever company's doing it, but in our instance, I needed someone who was over 18 to hand the car keys over. So you don't actually have to be the owner. Number 7, be careful when going over mileage, or like think about it properly, because if you're definitely going to be under mileage, like, and you know you're not going to drive it that much, okay, but people tend to underestimate how much they're going to end up driving their car, and they also tend to think, just without really thinking about it, oh, 6p a mile, that's not too much. If you've got yourself under 3p a mile for what you pay for going over your mileage, that's not too bad. So you go 5,000 miles over at 3p a mile, how's my math? 150 quid. That's not so bad, but you'd still rather not, but look, you sort of get 10,000 miles over and you're paying 6 or 7p a mile, yeah, then suddenly that's a lot. That's 600-700 quid going out, and you probably don't have that kind of money laying around. Or at least there's a very good chance you don't. And even if you do, you don't really want to pay it to them. So be sure of that, because I've seen a lot of people get stumped quite a lot on it, and just forgetting how much they are actually going to use their car. So don't be too confident thinking at the time, just because you win by paying a little less each month as a result of lower mileage, that you're actually winning. Look how much you go over, and I wouldn't want to be paying anything over going over 3, maybe 4p. It's up to you. You could take the risk, because if you do go under, you will under the mileage, then fine, you've saved yourself some money, but be aware, because people tend to underestimate how much they drive. Number 8. The condition of your car when you return it matters. Make sure you clean it. Again, have all those other bits there. And if you have had to have any work done yourself, make sure you've taken it to an approved dealership that's using approved parts. Because, as you've probably guessed by now, if it hasn't got any of those things, likelihood is there's going to have to be a charge paid for that, because it won't be, you'll be out of the clause of the contract, and they'll hit you with yet another penalty fee, and it won't be cheap, because it never is. If you get a penalty fee that's 60 quid, you've got one of the lower ends. 60 quid isn't cheap, but that's the way they do it. Number 9, read into your contract and see how much time you can take your car abroad if you are thinking of sort of moving country, or living 6 months in one country, 6 months in another. If you're doing it in the UK, they won't like it. There's usually an exception of somewhere around about a month they'll let you be abroad with it per year. That's it. The reason why is, if you stop paying, they need to be able to send someone over, collect your car and tow it back. If that car happens to be in Spain, that kind of makes their life a lot more difficult. So as a result, they're not prepared for people to do it, though there is an allowance for people to take it on holiday. So if you're buying it for that reason, then yeah, you're probably in a bit of trouble. So simply don't do it. Right, that's my main points that I think from coming with it. And as I say, it wasn't a nice industry to work in, but I mean, for other reasons, the office there, they just weren't very bright. But they weren't very good at all. But unfortunately, because it's captive finance, you don't really have a choice to leave once you're in there. So the customer service just wasn't the best, because it wasn't really how they made their money. They just did what they had to legally do to avoid people complaining or have to pay out more money. Well, they usually did. They weren't always the best, to be honest. They did end up having a lot of valid complaints, having to pay stuff out. But by the by, it can be a very, very, very good process to just keep the new car coming in, trade it out, and you have to pay for the MOT, and the likelihood of it breaking down is, vastly reduced, as opposed to sort of like me now buying a second-hand van, and then the clutch goes, and then something else starts dripping, and fine, you might not have paid as much up front, or be as tied in over the time, but there's always surprises coming out of nowhere, and in the meantime you have to put up with your vehicle actually being out of action, which is less than ideal, particularly if you need it for work.
Yeah, rewatched the video. Don't have much more to add. Only thing I should probably stress is it was 4 years ago, roughly. I did that job, so things could well have changed since then. And if there's anything to take away from it, really, onus is on you to read that contract. I know it's boring, but read it anyway. It was a pretty narky time doing that job. I'm glad I was only doing it as a temporary role because I wouldn't have made myself permanent. It was pretty horrible, to be honest, and always having to deal with disappointed people. But it's not all their fault in the sense that they don't make very much money from actually loaning it out. I think it was like 150 quid per head on average, so it wasn't like they had a lot of costs to play with in the first place because they were always so competitive trying to make sure people chose that car finance over others. But as long as you keep in line with everything, it goes well. But as soon as it starts to go badly, it can go very badly. And they unfortunately were the customers I had to speak to. So yeah, no, it wasn't a great time in my life. But yeah, other than that, don't think I have anything to add. Hope it was useful to someone.